Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Stephen King podcast. This is another bonus episode, and this is bonus episode 24. And I have with me today a returning guest, V.S. Holmes. Hello.
Hi, thank you so much for having me again.
Oh, you're most welcome. It's hard to believe that it's almost been a year.
Yes, yeah. What a year.
Yes, and how has your year been? Have you been busy?
Yes, I mean, definitely busy working on various projects, writing projects, and some around the home as we've been sticking close to home this past year.
So I guess that means you're not getting out to any actual digs or anything like that?
No, we haven't actually worked this year yet. So we've got our fingers crossed, but we're also grateful to be able to stay safe. So.
Absolutely. Okay, so if you could briefly tell everyone about yourself who didn't listen to the previous episode.
Sure thing. So I'm V.S. Holmes. I'm a sci-fi fantasy author. I focus mostly on queer and disabled characters. My two series are the Nel Bentley books, which is basically lesbian archaeologists in space, and the Blood of Titans world, which is epic fantasy. I also work when we're not in quarantine as a contract archaeologist.
Contract archaeologist. That sounds somewhat ominous.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty exciting, but we do have our ominous days, I think.
Right. Okay. I was just thinking of contract hitman or something like that.
Right. We clean up after the contract hitman, right? Because we deal with the bodies later.
That's right. Okay, you've got your two series going. In your fantasy series, your most recent book was Blood and Mercy.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that was book 4, I believe.
Yes. Yeah. So the two halves of it, they technically can be read separately, but there's about a 20-year gap between book 2 and book 3. So I think they should be read in order, but they definitely can be read as sort of two standalone duologies as well.
Right. And what's the world, or can you give us like a 50,000 foot view of what the fantasy series is about?
Sure. So it follows, the first half follows these characters who are caught in the crossfire of a war between the gods and the creatures that created them, sort of these older, more titanic powers. And then the second half follows these characters, some of the same ones, and then some new ones as well, those who have survived the war. It follows them in the aftermath of that and trying to find their place in this new world and what they want this world to look like, as they can influence it or not.
Okay. And is the series set in a alternate history, or is it prehistory from Earth, or is it a totally different place? Totally different place, yeah. Okay. And are there regular people in this book or series?
Yeah, there's definitely, your typical mortal humans, as well as those who might have some alternate bloodlines in their lineages. And just sort of how they interact, as well as a couple characters who have these titanic powers or who are descended from the gods.
Right. Okay. And I'm just glancing over your summaries for each book, and it sounds like there's been a big battle. And I guess the series is picking up with your last book 20 years after one of these battles, and everybody thought they were safe, but in fact it's just a reprise because something greater has come up.
Yeah. So a lot of the powers that were that sort of came to the surface in the first half of the series so far, those have changed the world a lot and changed a lot of the characters, and they're trying to determine if there are things that can be done with these powers as they're sort of latent in the world and still definitely affecting things. So it follows a couple of the newer characters who didn't live through this huge battle, and then some of the other ones who did in fact live through it and who have been profoundly changed by it.
Okay, and that's what the 4th book is focused on?
The 3rd and 4th. The 4th book itself really focuses on these two characters, Kepler, who is a classic broody 17-year-old boy who has a lot of power thrust on him suddenly, and then a young woman, Ree, who is a deaf princess sort of turned general, who is working on her own completely non-magical type of rebellion, while also dealing with a lot of the situations that the world is still dealing with this old magic and the aftermath of this continental war.
And I'm curious about this fantasy world in general. Was this informed by any specific cultures that you've come across in your studies, or is this something that you've built up and tried to be unique from everything else?
I mean, definitely a little bit of both. I certainly tried to put my own twist on things, but I was influenced by a lot of older cultures and also a little bit of industrialization, because that's starting to come into this world just in the very edges. And, I didn't borrow completely from any one particular culture, since a lot of those aren't mine to borrow from. But I did pull from some of the old ideas of the Greek empires and the Egyptian empires for some of the more broad strokes.
Right. Your stories, are they focused really on one or two characters, or do you have a large cast in each book?
I have a large cast, a large supporting cast, but definitely focusing on 2 to 4 main protagonists who are point of view characters. But I do like to bring in a few side characters, just because a lot of those are actually my most favorite to explore.
Okay. And do these characters interact with one another, or are their storylines separate, and or maybe I don't want to get too spoilery, do they meet up in the end or at the climax? Or
They definitely are intertwined,
okay.
Though not always in a positive way.
Okay. So one is the protagonist and the other is the antagonist, or is it a little
both protagonists, but
okay.
in their own way. I think as they get to know each other a little bit more, they start to see the perspective that the other one's coming from, but certainly not at first.
Okay. Is there a big bad or antagonist in this story?
The antagonist is really change and understanding how to fit in a world that wasn't exactly made for people like you. But on the other side of things, in Rhee's perspective, the main antagonist is the emperor who sent her off to be a political bride, and he rules with a complete iron fist, which unfortunately I got to draw a little bit from our own current state of affairs from.
Right.
It's supposed to be fantasy. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, that's an interesting point that you bring up, and I should give you up to state how your state of mind is because of the current situation, political situation in the States and the world, and obviously with the COVID crisis and the forest fires and the hurricanes. It's like end of days kind of prophecies coming true if you believe in the Bible. So I'm just wondering how the social mental environment of today's world is affecting your writing. Do you find it makes it harder, or is it actually providing fuel for the fire?
It really depends on the day. I've drawn a lot of inspiration from wanting to put something good out in the world, and a lot of science fiction and fantasy for me is about painting a world that you would like to see ours become, or draw from at least. So I've really been focusing on that, but it's sometimes hard when you yourself need the roadmap out of the darkness. So it's definitely it depends on the day.
Sure.
But I've been really inspired too by all of the communities I've seen come together, and all of the people who are still trying to do good works, and also the different avenues people are taking to enact change. That's really inspiring to see. And we've been participating where we can. But yeah, it's definitely, as far as like the overall mood, I'm not just going to scream into the microphone for your ears' sake. But it feels like that sometimes.
Some primal scream therapy.
Yeah, there's just been the like, okay, I wake up and just mentally start screaming.
Yeah. Okay. I guess that this book was probably written before a lot of the current events came into play.
For the most part, it was finished. Well, it was started and finished since the year 2016. In its current iteration, I had a few rough drafts kicking around.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, and it definitely, I think it was shaped by a lot of what we were seeing in the beginning of 2017 and 2018. But it also, on a more personal level as far as the characters go, because I do try to really get into my characters' psyches. A lot of fantasy focuses a little bit more on the epic battles and that sort of thing, which I do enjoy, but I try to get a little bit more character based. And I really found that this book, in a lot of ways, was a love letter to goodbyes, and whether that's for who you used to be or who you wanted to be, or on a grander scale. That was definitely a theme throughout the book that I didn't necessarily notice, but I did finish it in the last year of my father's life.
Oh, okay.
And then did a lot of the final works on it after his passing. And I think that on a personal level was a huge, profound experience, and definitely affected it. So I had sort of these like global things and then much more personal things that were impacting it.
Wow. Okay. I can't remember. Is this the last book in this series?
The latter two, Madness and Gods and Blood and Mercy, are sort of their own little duology. And I am returning to the world. Currently, I'm outlining another 2 books, but they will take place a couple years after the end of Blood and Mercy. And we'll sort of touch on some of the characters that were the focal point, but definitely focusing on sort of a new cast of characters and also a brand new continent.
Ah, okay. That's interesting. You seem to be working in duologies in this world then.
Yeah, it didn't start out that way. It actually started out with the first 2 books being a single volume, and then the next 2 also being a single volume. And due to the length and just structuring, I realized that they were better as a total of 4 books. And I think I'm just sort of keeping up that pattern. I like it when things match.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And it's a unique one because most series are usually trilogies or they're like 10 volumes or whatever. So to have a series that's really a bunch of connecting books, duels is interesting.
Yeah, I have a total of 12 books planned within the world.
Okay.
So there will be a much larger scope, both in the past before the first one, and then also reaching into the future of the world. But how interconnected those stories will be when they are finally finished, still up in the air.
Right. And I just want to touch on a point that you just made recently there about fantasies with their magical elements and character elements, and you focus on the character. But in these worlds, I assume these gods have powers and things of that nature?
Yes. So
there's there magic systems or
not in a more like organized lit RPG type idea. It is a little bit grayer. It's more elemental in nature, and we do see some of those powers obviously clashing in the battles and the effects that they have on people. But there's not a hard and fast magic system. It's a little bit less magic based than a lot of the more epic fantasy tends to be.
Okay.
I guess that's low fantasy, I think is technically the term. There's so many different ways to refer to it, but there's not all the characters have magic. Actually, very, very few of the characters have magical powers in the world.
Okay. And do these characters that do have magical powers, there's limitations on their powers? Is there a price that they have to pay for using their magic?
There's definitely side effects.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Because that.
The Madness and Gods definitely brushes on that.
Okay.
There's side effects as far as what it takes to use those powers and how that changes your physical form.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. Is there anything else about the series that you wanted to say, or?
Well, I think that's definitely most of it. I think that even people who aren't focused on having a queer subplot or things like that would definitely enjoy this book. And it's been really fun to watch the slow burn that I started in Smoke and Rain come to sort of cataclysmic end. So.
Okay. And Smoke and Rain was the first book. Okay.
Yes.
Ed, at the end of the podcast, you're going to treat us to a reading from the 4th book, correct?
Yeah. I'll just give you a little glimpse of one of the first chapters, just a little background on the character of Ree.
So let's turn over to your other work, and that would be is that the Starseed series?
Yeah.
With Nel Bentley.
Nel Bentley.
Yeah, you're a kick-ass archaeologist.
I love her.
Yeah. So what's she been up to?
Well, a lot of swearing and a lot of anger, but that's typical Nel. I'm currently working on the draft of the 4th book, Heretics, which will come out in April of 2021, COVID willing. So
the third book was Heretic, or is that coming out?
The fourth book is Heretics,
Okay.
and Strangers is the third book, which came out just in April of 2019.
All right. So why don't you give us a summary of who Nel Bentley is and what's her problems?
She has a lot of them. Nell is a foul-tempered and foul-mouthed archaeologist. Unlike me, she works on the academic side of things. And she's got her first really big dig, and she's really excited about it. And then everything starts going south in the first book. And she starts to see these things that they don't line up with her very skeptical worldview. And I definitely wanted to touch a little bit on some of the ideas of what would happen if extraterrestrials came to Earth long ago in human history, but not in the way that Ancient Aliens does it. I like to think that all of the races of humanity are certainly capable of creating things like pyramids on their own. So I wanted to kind of turn that on its head and subvert that. And it's been really fun to explore a science fiction world, which I adore through the eyes of a skeptic.
Right. So, and then the arc of the series is that she starts out doing digs on Earth, like Chile, and then through certain events, it takes her rather further afield than she originally envisioned.
Yes. Yeah. She, in the third book, she ends up on a different planet. She is exploring a space station as well. And yeah, she's not so keen on not having her boots on Earth, Earth's soil. So
right. Okay. So this is a series. This is different than your other series because this is staying with the same character, and is you're working on the fourth book. How many books do you envision in this series?
A total of 6 novels. There's also a prequel novella that's out that actually follows some of the events leading up to Travelers, the first book, from the point of view of Lynn, who is Nell's sometimes space girlfriend. And that's sort of fun. So I definitely want to explore the world with some more standalone novels. I sort of have the idea of doing a serial as well. But as far as Nell's particular arc, it will be a total of 6 books.
And do you see Nell as a sort of I have to draw the analogy because that's one that's going to come to mind for everybody. Is she sort of like the female version of Indiana Jones, or who do you see her aligned with as another fictional character, perhaps?
She definitely has elements of Indy and, of course, of Lara Croft.
Right.
But I wanted to show a character who is sort of unwilling to do a lot of those things. I mean, Indiana Jones definitely has his curmudgeonly moments. And she has those as well. But I really was focusing on how her understanding of where she thought that humans had come from. And when she sort of encounters where they might have actually come from. I really wanted to explore her understanding of that. And also, she's a young white archaeologist, and there's a lot of nuance and interesting commentary that can be had about, your history versus their history and so forth. And so I definitely wanted to explore that in a way that Indiana Jones and Lara Croft, while incredibly fun, definitely have a little bit of the white savior, old school looter archaeology thing going on,
right.
which not, I couldn't bear to put that in my work as an archaeologist myself.
Right. Okay. And I guess that's all the questions I have about the series. Is there anything else you wanted to mention about it that hasn't been asked yet?
Well, definitely, I think people who are looking for fast-paced fun with some dark themes, it's going to be right up their alley. I'm really enjoying exploring some ideas as far as artificial intelligence and so forth with the current book. So you can find all of those things in the series.
Okay, that's pretty cool. So you're not only just doing the archaeological unearthing of history, you're also dealing with futuristic concepts at the same time.
Yes, where the past and future collide.
Oh, that's really cool. And that must be a lot of fun to write. That's a good question. Which series do you like writing more? Or is this kind of asking which child you like better?
I mean, it is, but my process is very different between the much longer, more sort of arduous process of writing fantasy, and then the faster paced, tighter point of view of writing Nell. So it depends. I think
Mm-hmm.
during the summer, usually when we're digging, I like to write Nel's work because it's easier to just kind of dive in. Also, I can draw inspiration from all the various characters I meet in my real world.
Yeah.
So it's sometimes easier to fall into that. But lately, I've been wanting to just go total escapism with fantasy, which is understandable, especially because the fourth book, she's once again on Earth, and I'm trying to work in some of the pandemic stuff, which is not how I anticipated the series going.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting obstacle for a lot of writers, especially writers that are dealing like in more mainstream fiction. Like, are they just going to ignore, social distancing and that? For horror writers, I can see a lot of opportunities because so much more isolation. There, who knows what's going on in some parts of the world because of that. But for science fiction writers, they could go a lot different directions with it as well.
Yeah, every time my characters shake hands, I'm like, "What are you doing? Stop touching!" Stop touching.
Yeah, and I just another question came to mind. You said you were writing. You do some of your writing when you're in your digs. Do you find the fuel for your series split evenly between the two from what you've experienced when you're on your digs, or does your Nel series get more input from that as opposed to your fantasy series?
I'd say they're pretty split. I think Nel gets more obvious inspiration. Some of the fun anecdotes are definitely pulled right from actual experiences I've had or my friends and coworkers have had. So definitely the most obvious, and as far as her interactions and the way things work, and also because it is for the most part taking place technically within our world. But I spend a lot of time just sort of outside and for the most part alone or just with my pit partner. So there's a lot of time to just think and kind of delve into my own thoughts.
Right.
And so a lot of my plot knots get worked out in the field, regardless of which series that I'm currently working on.
Okay, cool. All right. So at this point, if you would like to do your reading now, the stage is yours. And how good of a voice actor are you?
We're going to find out.
No pressure.
There's a reason why I hired narrators for my books and not did it myself.
That's a good question too. Do you have audio editions of your books as well, or is that something that you're still looking at getting done?
A little bit of both. So the Smoke and Rain is currently out in audiobook, and it was narrated by Jake Ruddle, who is fantastic voice actor. And we're currently working on getting the second book out as well. Hopefully, probably early next year.
Cool.
And yeah, we're just going to keep on trucking right through the series. The audiobook for Travelers was out, but I'm actually currently recasting for the narrator. So we'll see that out hopefully again sometime maybe late next year.
Right. I ask because surprisingly to me, I've recently found out that audiobooks are actually for a lot of writers comprising the bulk of their sales.
Yes, yeah, and I'm not really actually much of an audiobook listener. It's very difficult for me to process auditorily. So it wasn't something I naturally gravitated toward. But my grandmother was blind, and she got a lot of books free through the Library of Congress audiobook.
Yeah.
And so through that, and especially, trying to make my stories as accessible as possible, I knew it was important, but it wasn't actually my first thought. And so far the sales have been great, and I'm really honored that so many people are checking it out. But yeah, it's really interesting because you'd think it'd be ebooks, but so far it's audio.
Yeah, I guess people are on commuting or whatever, walking, exercising, they're listening to audiobooks, which is I guess that it's kind of interesting. It's sort of like going back to radio plays.
Yes, yeah.
Because I've listened to a few. I don't do it a lot, but I'm currently listening to Robo Show by James Lee Burke, and Will Patton does the narration. And boy, he's fantastic. He's every character has a different voice, and it's really like a radio play. It's cool.
Yeah, the performances, especially like when you have a couple of them recently have had multiple actors portraying different voices, and it's just like what a production. But it's also really fun. I mean, I think those might be a little bit easier for me to listen to just because there's different voices to focus on.
All right, so I'm gonna just sit back here and let you have the stage, and you go at it.
Awesome. The fourth night on the trail, wolves circled the tents. At the camp's edge, where cook fires burned, they crept even closer. Ree leaned over, peering past the licking flames at the bright eyes blinking at the edge of the firelight. Already the weather was colder, the air carrying teeth as sharp as those glinting several paces away. You'd think they'd be frightened with this many people, she signed to the woman beside her. The guard spared a glance for the predators. War makes everyone hungry. It's been centuries since wolves were seen this far west. They've probably come to eat our dead. She turned back to her bowl with a shudder. Ree winced and looked back to the campfire's boundary. The glittering eyes were gone, just a memory lit on her eyes when she closed them. It would take another week to reach Atherlon's capital. More if the river crossing tomorrow went poorly. Even marches as a foot soldier didn't take this long, thousands of pounding feet beating their steady way across the dusty grasslands. It was hard to manage the transition from soldier to dignitary, but the differences in the march made the gulf between the two yawn wider. When she saw that Bimet was through with her food, she leaned forward. I have something to ask of you. Are you certain that's a good idea? Bimet's gaze moved from Ree to the looming tent of the Emperor's ambassador. Bilbon's shadow paced the tent wall, pausing when a runner appeared. Ree raised the spear beside her. It was mostly decorative, but the blade was sharp. I'll be quick. Her fingers curled with ease, forcing casual comfort into the conversation to ease her guard's worry. The guard's shoulders heaved in a sigh, and she fell into step beside Ree as they set off through the camp. Fire lit the makeshift road between the linen tents. Once out of eye line of Bilbon's tent, Ree ducked between the gently waving fabric walls of the larger barrack tents. Guards paced the edge. Already she caught sight of armbands, caught glimpses of a fist, rising, opening. Liberty. She settled on an outcropping, legs tucked beneath her, and raised her face to the soft air. There was little time to acquaint herself with the surrounding women, but there would be chance enough upon arriving in Atherlon, where they would be watched more but understood less. Bimet found an outcropping still within whistle distance of the camp, but outside the reach of firelight. Of Ree's half-dozen attendants, she was the only one she'd known before any of this. Their troops had worked together often, and the red armband she donned on the second day of their march told Ree enough. I don't like this, Bimet signed, lips pursed. Ree shrugged. There's no other option. I can't trust letters yet, not until I'm safely in Atherlon. There are too many eyes on me, and not only Bilbon's. Then I assume it's important? Fourth Riding is being transferred to a nearby town, she said, by way of answer. A little one I can't remember the name of. Bimet watched the glowing orbs in the trees bob and slink for a moment. And? Beneath Ree's hand, the rock was rough, ragged, and gray. Gone was the smooth red of home, the earth stained red by rust or blood. Her fingers curled in the crags, a tether to this changing world. They're led by Bonil Desval, of the Third Ark. I don't want him to leave the town alive. I know there are sympathizers there. She fixed Bimet with a pointed expression. Understood? Understood. I'll get word out now. It'll go out with the morning progress runners tomorrow at dawn. Bimet rose, hand pressing the small of her back when she straightened. I'll walk you back to camp. Ree shook her head. I can manage myself. The messenger's tent is on the other side of the camp from ours. When Bimet was gone, Ree's attention drifted to the darkness before her. A small piece of her wished, fleetingly, that she could disappear in the makeshift roads and slip away into the night. She would not, no matter how inviting the dark woods and winding trails might be. But for a few moments she could pretend. In a fortnight's time she would be in a different type of forest, one of cold white stone and looming duties. In Atherlon, isolation would be their greatest ally. She just hoped she could survive it long enough to see her rebellion through. Thank you.
And thank you. And that was from your fourth book.
Mm-hmm.
So
fourth book, Blood and Mercy.
Blood and Mercy. And you're currently working on the fourth book from your Nel series.
Yep. I'm working on that, and then we'll eventually return to the Blood of Titans world with Dagger's Dance.
All right. Very cool. And people can find out all about you at your website, VS Holmes.
Yep, vsholmes.com. And I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
And your books are available from your website and all the major sites, Amazon.
Mm-hmm. Yep, they're Amazon, Apple, Barnes & Noble, all of the other sort of smaller distributors. And you can also get paperbacks at your local bookstore.
All righty. Well, it's been great to have you on again. It's hard to believe time goes so quickly, but there you go. And I wish you all the best with your future projects, and hopefully you get back to digging soon.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me again. This was great.
Yes, not a problem. All right, you take care now.
Yeah, you as well.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.